Found a dead body in the forest while camping. It followed me home. My brother and I love going camping. If I had to tell you how much we've gone since we first learned to drive, you would probably find us strange. And that makes sense. Not many people enjoy going into random forests or up random hills and such, but we live west in North America, so there is lots of mountains and such. A hiker's dream and sometimes a camper's nightmare. That day was just the same as the others, loaded up on dehydrated fruit, is used to save space in bag and keep nutritional value, and set off into the more forest-heavy places near my town. Was going great. We hiked a few hours. Brother threw a rock at a snake even though I'm pretty sure it was poisonous, gathered some wild mushrooms, we've pretty much engraved the edible one's appearance into our brains, and set up camp. After a few hours we decided that staying in one spot wasn't very fun, so we headed off again for the next hours, taking our camping stuff with us further into the woods. Now here's where it goes downhill for the rest of the story. We went further and further into the countryside, talking, getting scared shitless by raccoons, snakes, etc. Then a terrible smell hits us. If I could describe it, you would be gagging along with me. We thought it could be a dead deer or moose. I don't think moose even live in America, so no clue how he figured that. He starts excitingly looking for it, using his shirt to cover his nose. He loves collecting antlers, and hunting, has a wall full of heads and antlers. I was never that into it. I've gone a couple of times, but it's usually too cold for me to continue by dusk. Anyway, I wasn't trailing behind him or anything. He's a grown man, but then he lets out the most ear-piercing scream ever. At first I thought it was another person he found and spooked, but then it hit me that it was him. I rushed over to him and saw him just standing there. There was a trash bag in front of him. It reeked, of course, but then I saw it fully using my flashlight. The bag was torn open, and I saw the body of a fairly young-looking girl, and I think the worst part that still is engraved into my sight, her body was found by animals before we got there. Her face was missing eyes and some flesh in the face, not to the extent where I could see skull, but I could see muscle. Her chest cavity was open and had been eaten by who knows how many animals. We booked it to the nearest town using Google Maps. Then rented a hotel and called 911. The town didn't too long to get to, 2 hours max while walking. Didn't catch the name of it. But we could have give the officers enough locational info for them to know exactly. So we told them rough direction and landmarks. It really got us both. We stopped hiking, and he became eerily silent and looked constantly scared. Now for the worst part. One day I decided to do a woodworking project to take it out of my mind. While I was going to the shed, I saw the same corpse clear as day, looking at me, upright. I froze and it quickly darted away as soon as I saw it. I then rushed to the spot where it was and saw nothing to indicate someone was there. I figured it a mind trick by my traumatized brain. Again, few days later I went out on my porch near the woods to smoke, and I saw a vaguely humanoid shape in the tree line, blinked, gone. Weeks later it happened again, this time at my window. This time though, it stayed for longer, 2 seconds longer, even when I moved, then it darted out of view like a puppet with no arm strings would, all floppy and the like. Still wasn't convinced. I hadn't gotten any good sleep since then, so it could have been sleep deprivation for my sake. Then it kept happening, again and again, and I started getting scared of her, named her even. Emily was what she looked like to me. I was nervous and terrified even in my own house. Constantly checking the trees, and the windows. Sometimes I was right, most times not. I don't want to tell my brother or anyone. He would freak out and word would eventually catch up to him anyway. And the worst one was only a week ago. This time it wasn't outside and it was at the middle of the night. I was going to go piss, not thinking to rent a hotel by that time. Then I froze, felt eyes on me as soon as I reached for the handle. Looked to my right and to my horror, she was standing, and it wasn't puppet-like. She looked like how a normal human would stand, no floppy arms. They were by her side casually. I blinked. She was still there. Again, she was gone, and it felt cold. I booked it to my car, and went to the nearest motel. My brother's house was closer, but I'm not telling him the body we found was haunting me. He would pass out. I've been in the hotel for now, and I won't be going back soon. I've got to tell him eventually, but it's not going to be today. Bought a traditional game for my family, someone's playing with my sister. I was scrolling on a shopping website to find for anything that would keep my family, especially my 4 younger siblings, off the screens, and at the same time entertaining them. Like a board game or something. Then I saw it. A rectangularish board with curved edges. It had 14 holes and rows of 2 and 2 big ones at the edges. There was a bag of marbles at the side. It was a konkak, a Malay traditional game. It was simple, yet oddly entertaining, at least that was what I remembered. Why wouldn't I buy it? So I got it and it came in a week. My parents were ecstatic. They had grown up playing this game in their small village with other kids while their parents mingle about. They were the first ones to play, and honestly it's quite cute seeing them reminisce their childhood. My siblings weren't too keen at first, but once they start, they couldn't stop. Even my 5-year-old sister was hooked. The game was simple. Here's a guide on how to play konkak. One night, I was awoken by the laughter of my younger sister, the 5-year-old. I looked at the clock, 2:38 a.m. What the hell is she doing at this hour? I thought to myself. I got up and went to her room. There she was, on the ground, her back facing towards me. She was playing with the konkak? Weird. I went up to her and asked, Amelia, what are you doing? I'm playing with my friend. A chill ran down my spine. There was no one in front of her. Who's your friend, Siong, Malay for darling? Layla. I swallowed my terror and I said, We can play again tomorrow, let's sleep first. Reluctantly, she agreed. I was scared shitless at this point. I wouldn't have thought so much of it if I hadn't placed the board at the top of the almost 2-meter-high shelf the night before. No way could Amelia have gotten it, even with the help of a chair, which her room didn't have. And it is quite common for young children to have imaginary friends, but not Amelia. She never told me about Layla before. Nor about anyone else. And we were very close. So for the rest of the night, I made her sleep in my room. Half to keep her away from whatever is in her room, and half to keep me company. The next morning, we awoken to the screams of my mother. I'm pretty sure the whole house heard 'cause they were all there when I came with Amelia. The marbles for the konkak was thrown everywhere. The board was thrown at one corner. The whole room was a mess. Mattress flipped, clothes thrown onto the floor, and Amelia's toys were everywhere, some broken. Thank God I made her sleep with me. What happened here? Mum asked. No one answered. I broke the silence by telling them what I had saw last night, about this Layla, half expecting them to believe me. My parents went pale. My dad said, Alyssa, when you stored the board, was it upside down? No. Why, do I have to? I asked. My dad sighed, you have to store it upside down or else it invites spirits to play. I was terry-fed. My mum bent down to reach eye level with Amelia. Siong, how long have you played with Layla? My mum asked. For a week. She said cheerfully. No signs of terror at all. It was like Layla was her real friend. My dad called the local ustaz, like an Islamic version of a priest. After examining Amelia's room and talking with Amelia, he spoke to my parents in private in a room. I pressed my ears to door and I heard. Your daughter has been interacting with a jinn. It is disguised as a young girl to harm your daughter. If you have waited any longer, it could have harmed her severely, could be even fatal. The ustaz blessed the house and told the jinn to leave my family alone. He told us to keep the recording of the Quran playing continuously, and it should be heard at all corners of the house. We did just that. The next morning, my sister told me Layla didn't call her to play. And it stayed like that. About 2 weeks later, we heard the tragic news of our neighbor's son. He was about Amelia's age. He had fell out of his room window in the middle of the night. Could it be Layla? I shuddered at the thought of what would happen if I didn't wake up that night. We threw the konkak away after that. Nope, not again, not today. Why, I'll never pull someone back from the edge again. You're getting crumbs everywhere. Can you use a plate? Sighed Luca, offering me one from the other side of the kitchen. I retrieved the plate and put it down, drawing in a breath. I was about to rush to the office. This was necessary to afford our rent and to allow Luca to continue his heroic act of keeping our household crumb-free. Can you put the plate on the table, Matt? Luca asked, eyeing the crumbs disdainfully while he reached for a box of mince pies. I stopped mid-chew and stared at him, as if he was taking the high road over a few crumbs. What is the point, Luca? I snapped. Luca glared at me as if I'd just ravaged his last mince pie. What's the point of what? Oh, shut the fuck up. I shoved the remainder of my toast in my mouth and got up to leave. My nose wrinkled as I suppressed a sneeze, a sure sign of Molly's arrival. Luca's cat, another freeloading housemate, sauntered into the room. At just 7:34 a.m., I already felt done with the day. Usually, the underground is rammed with impatient faces and a blur of suits. Today, it's hectic still. Commuters are replaced with faceless shoppers, all eager to plunge into heaps of bargains and sales. They won't have to wait much longer. The countdown to the next train has ticked down to just 1 minute. It's December 28th, so most sane people have taken time off. They choose to spend this liminal period between Christmas and New Year's lounging on their couches, getting fat on mince pies. I imagine Luca's scowl if I dare eat a pie without a plate. I feel a pang of relief for having chosen work over holidays. I'm going to do it. My grotesque fantasy of squelching mince pies and smearing them on the walls, as Luca gapes in horror, dissipated. I whipped around to see a man standing next to me on the platform. What? His eyes met mine. Despite being taller, he seemed so much smaller. The distant rumble of the train grew louder. I'm going to do it. For fuck's sake. How does someone continue about their day after witnessing a suicide? A drink is acceptable, I suppose. What exactly is the etiquette? The tracks began to rattle. I cleared my throat. Don't do it. Why? Well, he had me there. Why? I frantically searched my mind for a magical answer, but nothing suitable surfaced. I blankly stared at him. The train roared around the bend, its arrival imminent. Instinct overcame me as he was about to take his final step, and I reached out and grabbed the back of his coat. I was surprised by the lack of resistance as I pulled this stranger back from the edge. Frantically, I looked around for help. Had no one else noticed? As the train pulled in, the screech of its doors opening seemed to stretch out as time dilated. The muffled train announcements and the background chatter of passengers merged into a deafening whirl. My focus fixated onto a couple standing by the gap, arguing loudly, evidently not caring about airing their dirty laundry in public. An old woman with deep frown wrinkles sat glued to the seat behind them. She slowly turned her head, somehow aging further, and she looked right through me. Watching everyone experiencing the trajectory of their own timelines made everything seem so unimportant. The chugging of the train grew louder and faster, and suddenly, it had departed. I owe you my life. What? I was still frozen in place, and clinging onto the back of his coat so hard that my knuckles had turned white. I slowly released him, my heart finally slowing down. I'll return the favor, I swear. His words sank like a pit in my stomach. With nothing to say, I turned away, perhaps rudely, eager to continue my day as if these past moments had never happened. From that day, he appeared everywhere. At first, it was small things, coffee already paid for by the time I reached the front of the line, my favorite snacks left at my doorstep. I don't recall mentioning my peanut butter cup obsession to him while I pulled him back from the train tracks. More importantly, how did he even know my address? A dark feeling of dread crawled over my skin with each seemingly kind incident. I continued trying to suppress the train incident, hoping to erase it from my memory. I treated these acts of kindness in the same way. Everything seemed moderately harmless, I told myself. Moderately harmless was moderately good enough for me. I'm not completely sure why I hid the event and these incidents from Luca. Things had been tense since my outburst. Maybe that was the reason I felt so emotionally heavy since that day. Maybe I should apologize, even if it was just to make myself feel better. Arriving home, I rehearsed the apology in my head to sound as sincere as possible. I was not prepared for the sorry sight on my doorstep. Molly lay dead, eyes wide open, with a note attached. "You were allergic, right?" A problem solved. My stomach churned. This may now have escalated to beyond moderately harmless. The crushing weight on my chest could not be ignored, yet now I definitely couldn't tell Luca the truth. It was my fault after all for having to be a goddamn savior. He had no name, I couldn't recall his face. He was nobody. A phantom, and yet his presence surrounded me like a dark cloud, pushing against me, suffocating. I felt watched. Does he seriously think he's looking out for me? Like a twisted guardian angel? No, a guardian demon. Luca and I buried Molly together. We put it down to a cruel prank by a neighborhood kid. I held Luca as we both grieved, and he sobbed in my arms. Despite the tragedy, there was an oddly touching intimacy between us as we embraced, sharing our loss. A warmth stirred within me for the first time in years. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was a testament of our own mortality, putting petty arguments into perspective. Perhaps it was refreshing to be reminded that Luca was capable of love, care, and emotion. Over the next few days, the distance between us lessened. The physical touch that had diminished as resentment grew was now returning. Luca's arms around my waist, which would have made me shudder last week as I remembered his constant online gaming breaks, were now welcomed. I felt comforted, safe, and at home. One morning, as I munched on my usual toast and selected my work shifts for the next couple of weeks, I heard Luca clear his throat. He was standing at the doorway looking a bit nervous. I was thinking, "You've been working so much, and we've been cooped up here for so long, maybe we should go away? Something fun like we used to do, a camping trip in Wales maybe?" I stared at him, overwhelmed at his suggestion. As the corners of my mouth started to smile, he continued. "I know. I haven't been contributing much. Life has felt like a lot to handle these last couple years. I've been thinking about how fast things can change, and he gulped, can't bear to lose more of what we've been building together. I'll start looking for jobs again." I could finally see him. There was the empathetic, ambitious, adventurous person I had fallen in love with. Maybe this had all been a disguised blessing. Poor Molly, however, her loss might have been the jolt Luca needed to become the partner, lover, and man I knew he could be. Maybe my guardian demon knew what he was doing after all. I worked more the next week so that we could go away that weekend, beyond excited to go on an adventure together. Friday rolled around, and Luca had gone out to pick up food, drinks, and supplies. Meanwhile, I rushed back from work so we could start our rekindling road trip. Approaching our door, I noticed a note wrapped around the door handle. Had Luca left me a note? Cute, we hadn't left each other notes or gifts in years. Grinning like a love-struck teenager, I unraveled the paper. Finally shut him up. "From now on, no one will take advantage of you." Any remnants of honeymoon happiness vanished, replaced by a lingering, crushing darkness. I fumbled with the key while my hands shook, and finally got it in the lock. Tears already welling in my eyes, I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Camping equipment was scattered throughout the room, and also throughout Luca. A tent rod speared through his stomach, the blood had seeped out and formed a perfect circle around him. A dented gas canister lay near his caved-in skull. A tin of baked beans had been opened and rammed down his mouth, ripping his throat open as both beans and blood dripped down his neck. The crushing darkness that had been surrounding me now flooded my nostrils, throat, and ears, asphyxiating me. The curse had never left, I had merely been distracted by our newfound love to notice it. Now it coursed through my veins. Overcome with adrenaline, I fled. Luca hadn't made an intentional effort to make me miserable, but that didn't matter, he didn't deserve this death. Luca, my perpetual source of irritation yet unwavering companion, was gone. Somehow, the weight of responsibility settled heavily on my chest. How many more deaths would there be for my apparent benefit? I raced through the streets, engulfed in a haze of fear and guilt. My mind was a blur, with no conscious thought of my destination or actions, yet my feet knew exactly where to take me. This was clearly my destiny, my own inevitable trajectory and timeline. I found myself at the train platform, the site of our very first encounter. Approaching the train tracks, I sighed. My foot hovered off the platform, and I shut my eyes. Instead of falling forwards, I was abruptly yanked backwards. "Jesus Christ, are you okay?" cried out my Savior, as the train screeched to a halt. I gasped for air, feeling the oppressive weight of dread lift from my shoulders for the first time in weeks. I had never felt so alive. I turned to face him, a newfound clarity in my eyes. "I owe you my life," I breathed out.